I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and here today with me is John Feneck, portfolio manager and consultant at Feneck Consulting. Thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you here.
Likewise, Charlotte. Nice to see you again.
Really good to be catching up with you in what has been a very busy week for markets and current events, really. So I thought we could start with the biggest piece of news, which is definitely the US election. So we've had Donald Trump elected, and I want to get your thoughts on what we saw happen to the gold price. So it took a hit when we got the news, already seems to be recovering. What brought that initial drop there?
Well, a couple of things. I always try to hold myself accountable to my picks, and we were on Kitco in June talking up a Trump victory. Then we've been talking that Trump would win for months now because we just didn't believe in Biden at his age and what was happening with his health, unfortunately, to make it to the finish line. And then Kamala really didn't have enough time, in our view, to build a campaign and fell a little short, as you can see. So, you know, so we've been preparing for a Trump victory. What we weren't preparing for is the knee-jerk reaction down we saw yesterday on November 6th. I mean, that was very brutal. But what happened was you had a risk-on moment, Charlotte. It wasn't that gold and silver were no longer relevant. It was simply that people were celebrating the Trump victory because Trump's a Republican. Most Wall Street participants and Bay Street participants vote Republican. So they were voting with their dollars and, basically moving stocks up. And the US dollar rallied sharply yesterday, up about 1.5, 1.6%. And when you have a huge move up in the dollar, typically you'll have a move down in gold and silver. It's just, a counter relationship in many years if you go back and look at charts. So that, affected the miners yesterday. But then, you had the Fed today. So we put out a note yesterday morning to, investors saying, don't be discouraged by this. This is negative price action, yes, but be aware that, things can flip flop because the Fed is literally tomorrow. And sure enough, today the Fed comes to the rescue with a dovish, statement from Powell. And I think he was asked 3 different times by participants, will you be leaving the office? Will you be forced out of the office by President Trump? And he said no, or I won't talk about that every single time. So it's going to be real interesting to see how things, play out in Q1 in regard to that.
Yeah, we're in kind of a moment by moment time here, it feels like, and I like that you do these up to the minute updates there. I wanted to touch a little bit more on that dollar strength that we saw. So is that likely to be something that we see continue through a Trump presidency, or what are your thoughts there?
I don't think so. I think it was just a reaction to the news because the dollar faded today. So I mean, huge move up yesterday, about half of a fade today on whatever was made yesterday. And he was pretty dovish in the press conference. He didn't say anything that was something unusual to us, so no, I don't think the dollar is going to be super strong next year. It has been very strong. And the reason I think that is you've got other factors to worry about, like the U.S. data that's been coming out recently, non-farm payrolls on November 1st, extremely weak. Same day, ISM manufacturing hit a 13-month low. These are like major, U.S. metrics economically that you have to consider and respect. So I'm not saying we're going into a recession this month or next month, but I'm saying in 2025, if this kind of news keeps up, where you can't create job growth and manufacturing jobs, et cetera, you're going to have a weaker economy, which would weaken the US dollar, in our opinion. Also, you've got the BRICS literally talking October 22nd through 24th at their conference in Russia about developing a currency to compete with the US dollar that's going to be backed by things like gold. So it's just really interesting times. We remain very, very confident in buying gold and silver and related in this kind of environment.
Right. And I thought it was also funny that you mentioned Powell and how adamant that he will stay in this position for his remaining term in office, which we don't always get him making such strong statements like that. So do you think we're going to see some push and pull between Powell and Trump once he does come back into office?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Trump has said for months now that he's going to get rid of Powell, and Powell was saying today that's not constitutional. So, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I know it's going to be drama filled, and that's par for the course. So, but you know, Jerome Powell has led the Fed now for quite a few years after Yellen, and I feel like if we have a change in the Fed in terms of not only leadership, but also the constituents, right? The people that are voting members shifting to more of a Trump bias, it's going to be very good for gold and silver, even better than we expect right now because, you know, Trump wants lower interest rates. I mean, he's a real estate mogul. This guy wants lower interest rates and he's going to get it one way or the other, in our opinion.
Right. So we've got kind of that Trump impact on gold and silver prices coming up, but I wonder what sense you have of his impact on the mining sector as a whole. I think people and companies are hoping for a more permissive environment that would let companies move forward more quickly with their projects. Do you think we're going to see that? I know that you talk to a lot of mining companies. Are they expecting that?
They are expecting that in the US. I just hosted something that's going to go live tomorrow, I believe, on US gold companies. We did a webinar for an hour featuring US Gold, USAU, Integra Resources, ITRG, and one other. And we talked about that extensively on there. So if people want to Google that, Google search that, it's going to be called Mind in the USA, and you can listen in on comments from those CEOs that you know reside in Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, etc., and are doing this day to day. But I will say, if you look at Trilogy Metals the past 2 days, if you look at Northern Dynasty, these two stocks, TMQ and NAK, really popped, and that's because they're in Alaska, and Alaska has been a hotbed for Biden. Biden's gone after these companies and not been supportive. So the market is actually showing you they're betting that Trump would be more supportive of developing mines in the US, in our opinion. So like we don't own a ton of either of those, but we basically are saying that hey, if you're in good jurisdictions like Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, and other states outside of Alaska, you're going to get some love, we think, and we can talk a little bit more about that as this interview progresses.
Yes, I think I have maybe just one question left on the Trump and Fed situation here. So, of course, we know that the Fed has been locked in this battle against inflation. And one thing I've been hearing this week since Trump's election is his policies could end up being inflationary. So, any thoughts there? And we've already talked about the tension that could show up between them, but anything you would add on that note?
Yeah, it's hard to estimate, Charlotte, because he has talked about tariffs and other things that could cause some disruption. However, you know as well as I do that people say one thing in a campaign trail and then do another in office. I mean, if you remember, Obama was huge on clean energy, wind, solar, whatever, and then I think 6 months to 12 months later, he was backing not outwardly, but definitely not opposing big energy, meaning oil companies like ExxonMobil and stuff. So I just I don't place too much value in talk. I always want to see action, whether it's investing or politics or whatever, right? I will say that I think Trump will be much harder on some of our adversaries like China. If you looked at the Chinese market yesterday, it immediately dropped on the open when the news came out that Trump won. So that's, you know, going to be something to watch, I think, because if you look at China's rhetoric around their 75th anniversary of their party, they were talking about, you know, invading Taiwan and taking it back. It's like if we were to enter a third conflict right now, it would be completely disruptive to the markets, in my opinion. I think people are just hanging in there, the fact that we're in two already. But if you go for three, I don't know how you don't, you know, have a serious debt issue that already exists getting worse.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to look at what's happening now and extrapolate that when things are so uncertain. So thank you for humoring me on that one. I think
Sure.
let's move over and take a look at what's going on with the companies right now. We're in the midst of getting the Q3 results from the big gold miners. What are you
Yep.
seeing there? What would you pick out for investors to look at?
Well, with the exception of Newmont, NEM, which had costs go up to over 1,600 an ounce, and they got punished for it. They had their worst day that day, I think, since 2008, but it was down huge. Very surprising reaction, I think, in my opinion, because they are the largest holding in GDX, and they're a real mining company that's going to make real free cash flow. So, at 44 and change, we bought a little bit yesterday on the weakness. It's probably around 45 now, but bottom line is, that was a $58 stock just a few weeks ago. So when you see these kind of haircuts, you have to ask yourself, is this company's, thesis changed at all? No. I mean, their costs have gone up a little, yes, but they're digesting a huge merger with Newcrest and still getting through that. And that's one of the drags on the performance of that stock. But when you look at the rest of the earnings season, it's been outstanding, in my opinion. I mean, Agnico, AEM had a great quarter, ran to over $90 post market, after announcing that, and then just consolidated a bit. Coeur CDE came out with really good numbers overnight. They were up, I think, about 8 to 10% today. I mean, PAAS, which is the largest holding in many of the silver ETFs, Pan American, beat by 12 cents. I mean, the stock went from 22 and a half to 24 on that news, and then opened yesterday on the Trump victory at 20.75. And we're saying, like, we put out a note around 22 and a half bucks yesterday saying, like, this is the kind of volatility that we trade sometimes where, you have a real company like Newmont or Pan American. The earnings are gamed by the street, and then you have to decide as an investor, which side are you going to take? We take more of an intermediate view. I wouldn't say long term. We trade, or buy things for usually 1 to 3 years, Charlotte. We've said that before on your show. We don't hold things 10 years. If you held Newmont 10 years, you'd be super disappointed, right? Because it was an $80 stock at one point, and now it's a $45 stock. So, like, you can't just buy and hold this sector. We've said that over and over again. You have to be, if you're going to buy and hold something in this sector, you have to align with someone like myself or another professional that can guide you through difficult times like we've seen. 2021, 2022, 2023, these have been hard years to make money in. And this year has been different. We've seen some rays of hope and rays of sunshine, emerge. Still, something like Newmont, which is the biggest holding in GDX and the only S&P component in the gold sector right now, is struggling. So you have to look at that stuff and align yourself with someone like me or someone else that can help you understand why this stuff is happening, right? So that's your answer on earnings. We also look at near-term production stories, as two names that I haven't given your listeners before. We just started to buy Element 79, which is ELMGF. I met James for the first time 2 weeks ago at my conference down at the Four Seasons, Fort Lauderdale. Really interesting story there because they have both a Peruvian asset as well as a Nevada asset, and they're going to go back into production, he said, in Peru, probably in about 24 to 28 months. So when you're like a 5.5 cent US stock, like, if that is true and you can raise the money along the way to get there, man, it's like a lottery ticket. Honestly, it's just I don't understand how some of these stocks are trading so cheap right now, given that gold is at 2,700 ish, right? It's like if gold were at 2,000 or 15, 75, I'd understand. But some of these stocks, when you have gold in the name and you're exploring or developing a gold project, it's like unbelievably cheap. Another one I just talked to you yesterday is Sonoro Gold, SMOFF. I interviewed them with my YouTube partner, Don Durrett. Don actually brought it up to me and said, "Hey, we have to interview these guys. I just met with them and they are super cheap." So we did an analysis. Their market cap is about 13 million Canadian right now. Their plan is to get their permits in Mexico in Q1, let's say by March 31st. And then we asked them how many months to production they would need, and they said 10 to 12 months. So even shorter than Element 79, right? Something that you can again, a 5.5 cent stock, another 5.5 cent stock that has gone from 8 or 9 down to 5, down to 3, and now is back to 5.5. So it's like, will it retrace back to 8 or 9? I think so, because once it goes into production and proves people wrong, you'll see a lot of cash flow into a stock like that, in our opinion.
As usual, always appreciate the examples. I think that's very helpful for everybody. And, talking about the gold stocks, so I think this is an ongoing conversation that we've been having for months or possibly even years at this point. The idea that the interest in the gold stocks is still just not there from generalist investors. And I think we talked last time about how maybe we need that general market sell-off to generate some interest, safe haven buying of the gold stocks. Is that still what you think that we need to get that started?
I do. I mean, thankfully, we're seeing people recognize good earnings now. It's only taken like 4 quarters for the market to catch on to this. But like, the fact that Coeur took off on earnings today, the fact that other companies have had some success, like Agnico had a lot of success leading up to earnings, put out another good quarter. That's going to keep people interested, right? And so we have to do a better job as a sector of beating these numbers on both the top and bottom line, so it gets the attention of different analysts, different generalist investors. I will say that as a barometer for hope, I've had more new clients come to me in October last month than any other time in 5 years. And many of those people are people that have no money in mining stocks. They may have some gold, right, in a vault or in their safe or whatever. But they are saying to me, how do I buy gold stocks? I believe in gold. I see how well it's done for me. How do I get exposure to gold stocks and the leverage they provide? So yeah, I mean, I could give you a couple of gold stocks that we like if you're interested.
Of course, of course.
So, we talked about Trump and the US. I mean, we mentioned US gold at the onset. That is our largest US position, as well as our largest gold position. It's USAU on the NASDAQ. The reason being for multiple reasons, but George B is a mine builder by trade. I think they can get that mine in Wyoming built, which is called their CK mine, and in only a couple of years, right? Secondly, their share structure is ridiculous. It's 10.7 million shares. That's it. So if gold goes from 2675 to 3000, which Bank of America and Citi are calling for next year, that stock has got a lot of torque, a lot of upside potential, in our opinion. Beyond that, going from Wyoming to South Dakota, we've talked about Dakota Gold on your show before. That's done quite well. We talked about it at around 210 a share. It's trading at 255 now. Right below that is Badlands Resources, BLDNF or BDLNF. I have to double check. We'll put it in the show notes. But Badlands is a large land package, just like Dakota, and they're both right near the old Homestake property, which is, I think the oldest U.S. mine out there, period. Like, I mean, it goes back many, many decades. So, things like that in a Trump world where you kind of connect the dots and say, Kristi Noem, who, is running, the state of South Dakota, was almost, she was a VP candidate, top 8 candidate for Trump. So why wouldn't that state find a way to permit things at least as fast as everyone else, if not faster, right? We think that, you've got a good geo on that project, and Dale Ginn, who worked for Eric Sprott for a number of different projects. And the stock's trading at 14 cents US. I mean, again, it's just ridiculously cheap if you believe in gold. And lastly, I'll throw out another one that's kind of gold and copper. Inflection Resources. I just saw one of the board members at a conference last month, and the stock was at 11 cents then. I went on stage and mentioned it and said, you should just buy some of this. It's so cheap right now. It's an Aussie company in New South Wales. It's run by a good CEO. They've got funding from Anglo to help with offsetting any drill costs, right? Which is one of the key things when you look at explorers, is that, how are they going to get the money to drill, right? And if you have a big partner like Anglo that's helping you, that really helps me as an investor get more interested, because I know that if they're not hitting every single time, that's okay, because they've got more money behind that from a major that believes in the project, right? So that one's AUCUF. It ran from 11 to 21 after that presentation because they put out news that had nothing to do with me. And then basically the stock came all the way back down to 14 where it is now. So, those are the kind of things that, again, you can buy it at 11, sell it at 21, buy it back here at 14, write it back to 21. I mean, we're just holding it. We're just buying it on dips. We'll buy it usually between 11 and 13 and a half is kind of our buy zone on that stock. But at 14 in a hot gold market, who cares? I mean, again, I was at the front of the room saying whether you get this at 11, 12, 13, it really doesn't matter because it's probably going to hit 20, and it sure enough went to 21. So, yeah, there's so many great opportunities right now, Charlotte, in the microcap space.
Yeah, definitely, again, appreciate the examples. So we've looked at some near-term gold producers. We've looked at some companies smaller down the scale on the gold side. Usually when we speak with you, we talk about special situations, things that might be a little bit different that people are less aware of. So I thought we could take a look at what you have in mind there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I'll just give you one or two there. So we've talked about tungsten in the past because tungsten is a metal that is used in body armor and ammunition, and it's an interesting backdoor defense, play for us. The fact is though, there's only a couple of stocks you can buy that provide you tungsten exposure that are publicly traded. So one is Guardian Metal Resources, which is GMTLF in the States, GMET.L in London, does not have a Canadian ticker. That one has been a home run for us. I mean, we mentioned it on your show, I think the first time around 16 to 18. It's trading at 33 now, so a double, but it ran to 52 and a half on good volume this year. So, I mean, that was a triple pretty much from where we mentioned it. And it's consolidated back to 33 from 52 because it did a financing, right? I mean, this is just part of the drill with mining companies. You have to understand that they're smaller, they're going to need capital, they will have to do some dilution. But what they did just recently, literally a few days ago, was announce that they've put an offer in to acquire another tungsten project in the US, which would put them, I think, as the number 2 or 3 player in the US in tungsten, land package, if you will, in great jurisdictions like Nevada. So we're really excited about that stock. I really feel like antimony that tungsten could be one of those next metals that gets a lot of what's the word, exposure or notoriety in the commodities world because we produced 0% of tungsten production last year as a country, the US. 91% was produced in China. So, when you look at that stuff now in a Trump world, I don't know how that wouldn't be a buy, but watching it the last 2 days, there's been hardly any volume. It's just such an interesting sector to me that people don't like catch these things. They're always playing larger themes like, what does Trump think about tech? What does Trump think about clean energy? It's like that all matters for sure, but like our sector is so inefficient that you could find a stock like we just talked about, like Inflection, which actually does trade some decent volume, and it still moves from 11 to 21 in like 3 days. It's like you can make exponential returns in this sector if you're smart about it and you keep in touch with the companies like we do. So we do like Guardian. The other one is energy related because I think traditional energy under Trump should get a bid, right? And we bought a little bit of energy exposure over the last 2 days. One of the companies we like is Angkor Resources, ANKOF. When you look at their portfolio, it's oil, gold, and copper, and other things as well. But that's the three they've been putting press releases out mostly on in the last few months. And if you look at their presentation deck, they've basically got a chart that shows their oil production this year has just gone up almost every single month in a row from, I think, February. So, when you see that kind of a trend, you say, how is this let's call it 6.5 cents and round up, 6.5 cent oil stock, doing so bad in price, but also so good in terms of growing revenue growth, seeing revenue growth. And it's not like it's producing tens of millions of dollars of revenue, but it's one of those things that I think could go bigger, because the company wants to grow in the oil space, right? So if you see more conflict, if you see OPEC related stuff, oil could easily go and test $100, I think, under Trump, right? And so, this stock is going to have some torque from that 6.5 level to probably 10, and that's a great investment here, to complement other things in your portfolio.
Yeah, I think now is certainly the time to start thinking a little bit outside the box in terms of the normal commodities that you might be looking at. So really good to go into that. I think we'll wrap it up here. I'll ask if you have any thoughts to leave investors with, because I think this is probably the final time that we're going to be talking in 2024. Most likely the next time will be early 2025. So any
Yes.
advice, thoughts on gold?
Look, I mean, gold's had a great run here. You and I have known each other for probably 3 years. We've outlined this for investors many, many times, talking about 1900 last year, talking about 2000, and then 2300 this year. And now look where we are. We're at 2700. Now you've got the major banks like Bank of America and Citi saying 3000. That's very, very bullish. I know some people see that as a negative because they don't want the banks to get bullish on our sector, but I disagree. I mean, you need big money behind our sector, and having two of the top five banks in the world saying this is not a negative, in my opinion. We need more notoriety. We need more exposure in our sector, and that's going to help. But I would just say, don't just own gold. If you own gold and you're watching this, you have to own gold stocks. If you believe in the metal, you have to believe in some of these companies that are finding the metal. So, hopefully we'll get some people that will approach me for our services. As you mentioned, our real-time updates, I think are very unique. I haven't seen anyone doing this like on a regular daily basis like I do. When you in the gold sector, that is, there are people that do that in tech, all the time. But I feel like, when we put out something today, a couple minutes after the Fed, that really helps people that are at their computers. If you're actively trading and you get an assessment from someone like me to say, hey, we're seeing good activity here in GDX and GDXJ following, Powell's announcement, and this is very dovish for our sector. I watched GDX go from up 1% to finish up, I think, double that today, once Powell was done speaking. So, you can make a lot of money in this sector by partnering with people that look at it and take it seriously, whether that's me or someone else.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there, and definitely we'll have your details in the section below, as well as all the information about the stocks mentioned in the conversation. So thank you so much for coming on to go over what's happening in this very busy time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Of course. And once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and this is John Feneck with Feneck Consulting.